I'm Dr. Ryan DeBell from The Movement Fix. This is Movement Fix Monday. What we're going to look at in this video is the basic anatomy of stretching the quads. So the quads are the anterior compartment of your leg, of your thigh, and there's four muscles that compose the quadriceps group. So that would be the rectus femoris, the vastus medialis, the vastus intermedius, and the vastus lateralis. Now, the interesting thing is only one of those muscles crosses both your hip and your knee joint. So we've been talking about the last couple weeks, like the hamstrings or the lats or the adductors. Muscles that cross multiple joints are the ones that we can best target for stretching and usually cause the most issues. So, for example, the vastus lateralis essentially goes like this. The vastus medialis goes like essentially this. And the vastus intermedius goes essentially like this. So note, they cross the knee joint, but they start on the femur, they start on the thigh bone, so they do not cross the hip joint. So those three muscles, if you can sit like this, if you can fully bend your knee when your hip is in flexion, you do not have tightness in those three muscles. The fourth muscle, which is the rectus femoris, is more likely the muscle you're stretching when you're doing quad stretching or when you feel a stretching in the front of your leg. So the reason for that is this. Let's take spiny here. So as I said, those other muscles, they essentially attach, if this is your femur here, they don't cross above this. They start down here. And so hip motion doesn't affect the length of the muscle, the stretch. But the rectus femoris attaches onto this little thing here. So it actually does cross the hip joint. So it has a couple of attachments. And so what that means is when your leg goes back or when your hip does this, it will tense or tighten the rectus femoris from above the hip joint. So then if you combine hip extension with knee bending, the muscle that's loaded the most is your rectus femoris. It's not your vastus medialis, intermedius, or lateralis. So that has some implications. If you are going to try to stretch this muscle, think about this. We've talked about how pelvic positioning will affect the muscle attachment points. So if the rectus femoris attaches here, look at the low back position. If the low back rounds, do you see how that brings this attachment point up? So that would preload the muscle. If your low back arches, that lowers this attachment point towards the ground, and that will put slack on the rectus femoris. So there's this battle going on around the pelvis. You have muscles that attach from your abdomen, and they go here that will pull this way, so some of your abdominal muscles, and then the tension of the rectus femoris pulls this way, the hamstrings will pull a certain direction, so there's a lot going on there. But the way that most people set up a quad stretch is like this. Well, maybe they'll do it standing. So if they stand, they'll do this. But if you arch your low back excessively, you're not going to get as much stretch as if you kind of tuck your low back under. And the reason for that is because of the pelvis tilting and how it changes that attachment point. The other common stretch that people will do is they'll kind of do this like lunge stretch. So by the way, if I'm stretching my quads and there's going to be a lot of tension, I don't want to jam my kneecap into the ground because it's already tight around there. But let's say, somebody goes here, they go down like this, and then they stretch. If you're here though, and you arch your low back excessively, you're going to be stretching less, and you're just going to be loading your low back a little bit more. But if you tuck your low, and see this is really loaded up, the more that your heel is towards your butt, the more you're tightening it around the knee and the hip. So for a lot of people, it's too aggressive. So if I arch my low back, less stretch. If I tuck and tilt my pelvis, so I'm flattening or rounding my low back, it brings that little attachment point up, and then I get more of a stretch sensation through the front of the quad. So that's the basic anatomy of how you would stretch the rectus femoris and why you're not really stretching those other three. But think about the implication for certain lifts. What if somebody's doing, let's say, a lunge, and so when they lunge, they go down and they arch a lot. They may be arching a lot and loading their lower back because their rectus femoris can't get into that lengthened position and so it pulls it. Or think about like if you're doing a split jerk and you, boom, go here and you arch, it may be because there's a rectus femoris limitation. So those are things to look for and what's implicated based on how somebody is moving. And there's a battle, like I said, between the abdominal muscles controlling the pelvis, the tightness of the anterior thigh, posterior thigh, and medial thigh musculature that you have to consider. So that's the basic anatomy of stretching the quadriceps. Oh, before we go, I have to mention this. There is another muscle on the anterior thigh called your sartorius. It attaches way up here. It crosses down like this, but when your knee is bent, it is slack. So we're not considering how that is stretched with this group. So that's what I got for you guys this week. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, you can find me at The Movement Fix and check out themovementfix.com/workshops to see 8 hours of stuff like this in a live event. I'll see you guys next week.